Hi, dear teachers. Welcome to the eighth session, Materials Evaluation, Part 2, which is the topic of chapter. Let me see the chapter. Okay, this is, let me see, Materials Evaluation, Brian Tomlinson, 21 to 40, I think 49, yes, to 49. Okay, in the previous session in part one, I actually introduced the materials evaluation, and I mentioned that we have two stages. Materials evaluation, or the main part of materials evaluation, is different from materials analysis. Materials analysis or description is the actually a physical description of materials. It's not that important when you want to assess and evaluate the effectiveness of materials, usefulness of materials, the quality of materials, and you should go to stage two, which is called materials evaluation. And we said that materials evaluation should be ongoing, continuous, and in three phases are pre-use phase, while use phase, and also post-use phase evaluation. Uh, what is important is that how many teachers in Iranian context evaluate their materials systematically? Do they decide to evaluate their materials, or they think that the materials are prescribed and they have to follow the materials? I mean that if the teachers evaluate the materials, they do not need to ignore the materials. If they evaluate the materials, then they can use the materials in the way that creates most opportunities for learners learning and for learners development. So it is good for a teacher to know how to evaluate materials, how to assess the material's quality and effectiveness. Some of you may say that in the Iranian context it's not good, it's not possible to evaluate materials because we are not, we are forced to use the same material. Yes, if you evaluate the materials, if you're familiar with the principles of teaching and learning, you can again use the same materials in the way that maximizes learning opportunities for your students. You try to use the materials in the same materials in a way that uh, meet your student needs and purposes. Okay, we talked about the first important actually criterion, which is learning theory with some perspective and aspects, and I focused on them and elaborated on. Then I talked about actually cognitive involvement and affective involvement, but here the the fourth actually factor is collaborative learning. Collaborative learning is actually important. We should involve our students into cooperative and collaborative learning because learning is interactional. Learning happens in social interaction. It's not always good, especially language learning, to learn, do self-study, only self-study, interaction, interactive activities, involving students in collaboration and cooperative problem solving or projects uh, specifically helps students to become autonomous. You may ask how autonomy refers to be independent, but collaboration means to work with others. Autonomy doesn't mean to be independent of others. This does not mean autonomy. Autonomy means to be able to be interdependent, simultaneously independent and interdependent. I mean that by independent, it means that you can set your own goals, you understand your own goals, you assess your progress, and you generate feedbacks. And you seek support and feedbacks from others and assistance from others. The other one is interdependence. Interdependence means that you are able to cooperate and collaborate with others. So autonomy and independence includes independence and interdependence. We call someone independent when he has the abilities of being independent in setting goals, in assessing achievements, in regulating his or her learning, in reflecting and inquiring into his her own activities. But simultaneously, he or she should be interdependent. Interdependent means to be able to cooperate and collaborate with others, to be with others, to live with others. So you cannot call someone autonomous when he is not able to cope with others. That person is not independent. That person is aloof. That person is reticent, not independent. So in Iranian culture, independent means to be reticent, to be aloof, to escape from others, to do something from to do something alone. But it's not the meaning of independent. Independent means that you can regulate your activities. You can regulate your interaction with others. Here, independent refers to the ability to regulate, the ability to control, the ability to advance, the ability to improve. So it includes both independence and interdependence. Criteria number 5, meaning, focus, and raising consciousness about language features. Okay, if you remember from the previous semesters, when we talk about meaning focus and form focus materials, materials should be simultaneously meaning focused and form focused. It means that the primary focus should be meaning and communication, but we should not forget about raising students' consciousness about features of language or the forms of language. So while the primary focus is on meaning and communication, we should draw our students' attention to language features, because they need to learn language features. Because if we actually restrict ourselves with the meaning, we only try to communicate our ideas. Communicating our ideas correctly, appropriately, is better than only just communicating. If you remember comprehensible output hypothesis, it says that if we want to improve our knowledge of language, our mastery of English grammar or syntactical structures, it's better to modify our language in interaction through production. Modify to do what? In order to correct. Modify in order to make our sentences or structures that we produce native-like. Okay, so both meaning and communication and forms should be paid attention, while the primary focus is on meaning and communication. We should not ignore, or the material should not ignore, language features or forms of language, grammar of English, but it is of secondary importance. We should draw our students' attention to the features of language. For example, in our previous actually semesters, when we were working on academic writing, I asked you to find some phrases, some lexical bundles, some features or some expressions used in, for example, the writings you were analyzing. That's kind of actually consciousness raising or paying attention to language features or forms of language. Okay. Number 6, experience of a spoken grammar in use. Okay, what is important is that a spoken discourse, a spoken grammar is different from written grammar. Because students learn language to speak and listen, and they learn language to read and write. But unfortunately, in foreign language countries, especially in Iranian context, the only grammar which can be used in the textbooks is written grammar. Even if they write a conversation or insert a dialogue in the textbooks, the dialogue is unfortunately written based on written grammar. And then by that dialogue, they give opportunity to students to practice, to have a spoken practice of written grammar. Okay, pay attention. A spoken practice of written grammar. Grammar is written, but you're speaking. Students practices speaking. The grammar, the language is written, but the dialogue creates a space or opportunity for students to have a spoken practice. So you should have the experience of a spoken grammar, not a spoken practice of written grammar. So if the materials include dialogues, the dialogues should be written based on what? A spoken grammar, a spoken language and discourse. Number 7, situational approach and a variety of content. Okay, so when we talk about this one, in the next actually items, I have included other content. In the previous sessions, we talked about other content. About situation. Situation is one of the actually components of other content. All situations should be, or a variety of situations should be included in the materials. For example, if we are developing a textbooks and using a textbooks with a focus of general English, so we cannot always talk about, for example, airport, traveling. So different issues, different topics, different problems common to ordinary people should be included. The other one is intercultural awareness. Unfortunately, the point is this: what we are learning is learning a language through which we can communicate with the people around the world. The purpose is not to communicate with black English users of English. The purpose is to communicate globally. So if we believe that, okay, forget about American culture, forget about, actually British culture, forget about Japanese culture, forget about, Chinese culture because they are communist, they are so and such. Okay, we are not adapting their culture. We are just knowing their culture. We're just studying their culture. We are familiarizing ourselves with the norms of culture. Why we should learn culture of target actually languages? Here, the important point is that we have world Englishes. World Englishes. So what does it mean? It means that we learn English to communicate with Japanese. We learn English to communicate with Americans. We learn English to communicate with French, with Chinese, with Russian. So I'm sorry, this should be moved. Okay. This. So intercultural awareness is important because culture actually influences and determines pragmatics, and you know that pragmatics is the most important perspective of language. We learn grammar, we learn vocabulary, pronunciation, and different perspectives of language. But when we say pragmatics, we are talking about meaning-making choices. Why we prefer some choices over others, in what conditions, in what situations, and why some of the choices should be preferred over the other ones. This preference and this why is actually refers to pragmatics. And culture is one of the most important factors controlling, determining pragmatics. That's why we should have intercultural awareness, not cultural, intercultural awareness. Targets culture, source culture, and world English cultures. Learner sensitivity or learner needs and purposes. So the textbook should be needs responsive. The textbook should be sensitive to learners, to the identity of learners. Sometimes learners are actually ladies, learners are gentlemen. Okay, the gender of learners, the age of learners, the background of learners, the vulnerability of learners, the interest of learners, the needs of learners, the styles of learners, the strategies of learners. To see whether the learners are privileged or underprivileged. The material should be sensitive to learners' identity, to learners' condition, learners' purposes and needs. That's very important. Critical thinking. The material should involve students, should develop students' critical thinking abilities. So if the purpose of education, any kind of education, including L2 education, is to create successful citizens, autonomous citizens being simultaneously independent and interdependent, they should be critical thinkers. A critical thinker not only reflects on the activities of his or her teacher and others, decision makers, he or she can only reflect on his own progress, his own performance and practice. The movie or the film sent by Ms. Jalalizadeh shows that when the students try to be critical thinkers, to question the idea of the teacher tried to alienate the students. So critical thinking is important. The materials are not there to only introduce and provide and deliver language content. Whether we agree or disagree, whether we accept or refuse it, materials or textbooks have two options, are either this side and this side, the other side, whether they improve critical thinking or they are neutral. So you cannot say that, okay, this textbook is not about critical thinking. So because we are not concerned with critical thinking here, we just want to actually help learners learn some vocabulary items. Okay, forget about this idea. You are whether it's encouraging critical thinking or you are discouraging critical thinking. If the textbooks do not encourage critical thinking, do not create a space for critical thinking, so they are discouraging. They are killing critical thinking abilities. The other factor is formulaic expression. More than 30 to 40% of language is used in form of phrases, in form of formulaic language, expressions. It means that speakers of English, speakers or users of language do not use language word by word. A number of words come together in form of a bundle. That's why that in English we say lexical bundles. Some words come together. The purpose of this study. So when you want to write about the purpose of your study, so we have always the purpose of this study, the purpose of this study. When you say the purpose of this study, you see this as a single item. So the purpose of this study. How many words? 5 vocabulary items. But these 5 items come together and they function as a single unit. So is it easier to learn and remember and use single unit or 5 items separately? That's why that it is strongly recommended that the materials and teachers should think in terms of formulaic expression, phrases. The other important point is automatization. Automatization means that, like language, natural language context or communication actually situations, when we want to communicate, we should remember language features or language automatically. So it's not possible to think about our ideas, to think about our thoughts, and think about the correctness, the grammaticality and appropriateness of our language. So we should automatically remember grammatical and appropriate language when we are focusing on our thoughts, organizing our thoughts. So the materials, the exercises and practices in the materials should provide the opportunity for students to automatize the language they have learned through pushed output, through comprehensible output, through experience of language and things like that. The other one is pushed output and interaction and negotiation of meaning. These pushed output refers to comprehensible output. It means that in Iranian actually L2 education context and the materials textbooks, students are only asked to read something or listen to something, but we do not provide students to produce language. By producing, production itself is not important. Interaction involved in that production is important. The creation of space and opportunity for modifying the produced language is important, okay? So when we say pushed output, it means that we are going to have interaction and negotiation of meaning. Negotiation of meaning means that when we say something, the other actually interlocutor or the person, teacher, or the expert other who helps us and help us interact with us to modify our language and create the most grammatical and appropriate language. That's why post output is essential if you want to actually become native like or proficient language users. Okay. Okay, I talked about pushed output, but we have two types of free and controlled production. The point is that when I am talking about pushed output, it doesn't mean that we should immediately force our students to have production or to involve in a language production because it is demanding, it may not be possible. But first, we may have controlled production. Okay, controlled production means that we say part of the sentence and the students may use the other or complete the sentence, or we first pronounce the item and then they repeat after us. So this is called a controlled production, and then we come to free production, and so both of them, the actually purpose of controlled production is to help learners, to encourage them, and to tell them that it's not they are not going to be overloaded, they are not going to be involved in stress creating in actually a complex activity of language production. So controlled production means that I am here as a teacher or as a textbook or the exercise to help you. You are going to say part of the sentence, and then they are given the opportunity to have free production when it is actually felt that they have the ability to have free production. The other one is ways of presentation. Okay, how the materials are presented in the actually textbook is very important, not in actually assembly line, and there should be variation, and this way of presentation is very important. And number 17, provision of culture and pragmatics, language appropriateness plus a speech act. I talk about cultural awareness, and I actually refer to pragmatics, and because of the important point of actually culture and pragmatics, I use a pragmatics here to remind you about actually the significance and centrality of culture, and that pragmatics depends on culture. Pragmatics is influenced and determined by our knowledge of cultures, so we should include both of them in our language materials. Number 18, units of language. Okay, this is very important. This refers to our view to language. Remember, different theories of language. Suppose that you're given the opportunity to make a choice between Chomsky and Halliday. Whose theory of language is better to be used for language learning, language development? Chomsky sees language as a system, but Halliday sees language as discourse. Which one is better to be adapted, to be employed? Halliday for sure. Why? Because if you learn language in terms of Chomskyan linguistic theory, you only study system of language. It means that you study the structure of sentences. You study the structure of a word. So is it okay to know about words structure and sentence structures but not be able to use them? Do all native speaker language users know the structures, or they have knowledge of their language? Or, okay, forget about English speakers. In our Persian language or Farsi, the proficient users of Farsi, those, for example, who are living in Tehran, are they familiar with the knowledge of actually with the language of Farsi? They are only users, native speaker users of Farsi. So Halliday says that, or language as discourse says that, language should be considered in terms of its use, in terms of its purposes for which it is used, in terms of the functions it is used, not in terms of the structure of sentence, in terms of grammatical rules. So Chomsky, if we adopt Chomsky's theory, we learn about language. But if we use Halliday's theory of language, language is discourse, we learn language itself and how to use it appropriately. So unit of language is, we have generally two units. Language at sentence level, language at discourse level. So you have seen language at sentence level in Iranian textbooks. You may see a paragraph, you may see a dialogue, but these dialogues and passages have been actually formed through putting together sentences, segregated sentences. So language is provided in form of sentence. The unit of language is sentence. But in reality, in real world language use, language is used not in terms of what? Sentence. It is used in terms of utterances. For example, if I ask you, which one is fricative? F, v. Or, okay, which one is soundless? P, b, p, b. Okay? If you say only p, so it is called as actually an utterance. Your answer is only one sound. You say p without saying anything else. You do not say, okay, p is a soundless voice. Or, I'm sorry, a soundless sound. You only say p in response to my question. So you communicated with me, and I communicated with you. You communicated with me with only one sound, and you said p. So I understand that you mean p is a voiceless or yes, a voiceless sound in English. The point is that in natural language use context, language is not used at the level of sentence. Sentence is bookish. Sometimes we use phrases, sometimes we use words. Sometimes we use a number of words standing for one paragraph. So natural language should be used. It is usually in form of discourse. Discourse means a number of sentences or utterances. It's better to say utterances in communication. Okay, the other one is authenticity of texts. Okay, the texts and tasks should be authentic. If we use constructed, non-authentic, unauthentic text and tasks, it means that we are using distorted language. Distorted language means that language which is not natural. What does it mean? It means that the language features are there for the purpose of memorizing and learning and to pass the exam, not to be used in the future course of action. So what we are learning is different from what we are going to use, what we need to use, and what we should use in the future course of action. So just we are wasting our time. The other one is the world English approach to interaction. The purpose of language learning is not to, for example, see some black English movies. The purpose is to successfully communicate. We should be able to communicate with Japanese, Chinese, I don't know, Italians, French, Russian, Iraqis, Afghans. Proficient English is important. Not, for example, some people still try to prefer British English, Black English, American English. Proficient users of English, proficient using of language is important, not native likeness. Interaction strategies. So knowing language is not enough if you want to have successful communication, if you want to meet our needs and purposes. In addition to language, we should be familiar with the strategies of communication. Sometimes you, me, and our other colleagues and friends, sometimes we fail to successfully communicate. Why? Because we are not familiar with interaction strategies. We know language, but we cannot use them because we are not familiar, we do not have mastery of interaction strategies. Then the materials should be genre-oriented. Why genre-oriented or discourse-oriented or corpus-informedness? If you want to have authentic materials, if you want to improve the particular skills and ability of the students to use language for the particular purposes, they should be genre-oriented. For example, if the material is teaching reading, yes, if the materials is on reading comprehension, so reading comprehension of journalistic text is different from reading and comprehension of encyclopedic texts. So the genres are different. If you're reading a narration, a narrative text, it is different from studying an argumentative text. So they belong to different genres. So it should be genre-oriented, because by genre-oriented, we know that in this genre, for these purposes and functions, these features are used. So it limits our options of meaning-making choices and meaning-making. We see that, okay, here, this is narrative text, and meaning-making choices are these if we want to meet our purposes. So you know what you should do. You know that what meanings are going to be communicated and what are the language options and features to be used to communicate those meanings. Again, it should be careful about pronunciation. Okay, let me give you an example. For example, in Iranian context, sometimes the focus is on spelling, dictation. Dictation focuses on spelling. So students, in order to learn dictation and spelling, for example, they read blackbird as blackboard, and they write that way, and then they pronounce it differently from what it should be pronounced. Or, for example, people, in order to learn, the teachers sometimes actually advise their students, pupil. Okay, say pupil in order to remember the spelling. They read it pupil, and then they learn it that way. So pronunciation is very important, because if you pronounce wrongly, and we have always suffered from this problem, not only you are not learning actually that language correctly, but you are learning something that interferes with your future learning. You're learning another interfering language. So if you do not learn at all, it's better to learn something wrongly. Non-linguistic content, again, this one is important. Other content. You cannot say that the textbook is about language learning. It should include only language. But all textbooks include other content. All textbooks include assumptions. All textbooks include ideologies. All textbooks include photos, drawings, and things like that. Other than all textbooks actually include materials on gender and age, on economy, on sociology, on feelings, and humanity. And most importantly, I think, what about criticality? What about, other content? If you, for example, assess and evaluate Iranian textbooks, what you see about culture? They claim that they are actually providing for Iranian culture, but I do not believe actually in this idea. I do not believe so, because they are not introducing Iranian culture. What about age? What about gender? What about ideology? Yes, you see the ideology, you may see the ideology of particular groups, those who have written them. Left or right makes no difference, but you can see ideology and ideologies. So when we say other content, we should think that whose purpose is served by this book. The knowledge, which knowledge? The knowledge is controlled by whom? Why some kind of knowledge and information is reproduced in the textbooks? Because that knowledge and those pieces of information or facts serve the purposes and needs of particular groups of people or teachers or materials developers. And the other one is hidden curriculum. What about hidden curriculum? Sometimes some topics, some figures, some cities, some ethnic groups have been included in the materials, and the material usually talks about them. Or for example, they choose one of the figures. There are 2 or 3 outstanding qualities or features of that figure, but they deliberately focus on one of the features of that figure. Ignoring, discouraging other actually qualities of that person or figure. Why? Because this kind of emphasis and focus meets their purposes, is in line with their needs and purposes. So criticality means to be aware of your own needs, to be aware of the purposes, and to know how those purposes serve them. What kind of knowledge is there? Does the textbook want you to memorize and learn control knowledge, or it is empowering you to assess your world? The important point is that does the textbook help you to read the words of English, or does the textbook help you to read the world? Read the worlds. Reading the words or reading the world. So if it only helps you to read the words, it is limiting you. It is limiting you. It is putting a number of obstacles in front of you to see the world properly. But it should help you to read the world. What is happening around you in terms of socio-political, socio-economical, socio-cultural context. Thank you for your kind attention. Have a nice day.